Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love talking to creative people. I think they make life bearable with their projects and what they bring us. And today my guest is an author. His name is Mark Malkoff. He is the author of Love Johnny Carson. He worked on it with a gentleman named David Ritz, but it's Mark's interviews from a podcast that he did about Carson for many years that are the basis of the book, and then he added to it with his own research and his own observations. He has been a super fan for many years, but he's actually quite a bit younger than me. So Carson, to him, like, he was probably 12 when Johnny retired, but he became a super fan, which I found so interesting. And I really enjoyed having this conversation with Mark. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that this podcast is pretty much brought to you by me. But if you want to support it, there are a few things you can do. You can go to DennisAnyone.net and leave a tip in my virtual tip jar. It helps me cover my expenses, and I really appreciate it. You can also subscribe to my Substack or Patreon. It's the same on both sites. Dennis Hensley's Happy and Gay. It's an All Good Vibes spinoff of this show. And you can also become a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows, queer shows, under the Derek and Romaine empire. And for a monthly fee, you get my show early, and you get all these other great shows. Also, my party game Search Party is now available to order. And you can do that at our website for the games, youdon'tknowmylife.com/search party. Yeah, you can order it there, and I'll send it out to you. And hopefully we'll get it up on Amazon before too long, so that's a lot easier for folks. All right, enough of the plugs. Here now is my interview with Mark Malkoff, the author of Love Johnny Carson, and here's the subtitle, One Obsessive Fan's Journey to Find the Genius Behind the Legend. Joining me now from New York City, it's Mark Malkoff. He is the author, along with David Ritz, of a new book called Love Johnny Carson, about the famous Tonight Show host and your fondness and obsession with him a little bit, if you will. So welcome to the podcast.
Dennis, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, I remember Johnny Carson. I grew up, I'm a little older than you by a fair amount, but I remember, like, people wouldn't say, did you watch The Tonight Show? They'd say, did you watch Carson? Who was on Carson last night? Like, He was just like part of the furniture. He was just you know, you don't imagine him as a child, or like, he was just the guy on the TV all the time. And he had a kind of comforting presence to him, or, you know, the way I remember him. So what struck me about your book is your origin story, because you were not somebody that watched him every night as an adult. You were into him starting quite young. So talk about your origin story and how you got to be so fond of Johnny Carson.
My dad got me into comedy at an early age. I was watching movies like It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, Stanley Kramer's.
Right.
So I knew who Buddy Hackett, Jonathan Winters, all these people were, Jerry Lewis. So he got me into Carson early on, and my dad had gone in 1968 to New York, and he would tell me about how amazing Carson did Karnak the Magnificent. And then I took the NBC studio tour when I was 13. I got to be in Carson's studio and saw the rainbow curtains, and they had to basically drag me out, and I just was always into Carson. And I had so many questions about what went on behind the scenes, how people got on the show, and just him. And shockingly, for somebody that dominated American culture for 30 years, the stories did not exist. So I did this undertaking. I thought I might talk to 3 or 4 people. That turned out to more than 400.
400 interviews you did. You did some for your podcast, and then you turned that into a book. Now, the podcast, is it ongoing, or did you kind of move on from that and focus on the book?
I stopped a little bit a while ago. I did almost 400 episodes. I released a new one, I think, a couple months ago. And I have some new ones I recorded. Yeah. So, yeah, I did that for about 8 years.
Wow. What was it called? What was the podcast
The Carson Podcast.
The Carson Podcast. So, but you used to record it on VHS and then watch it over breakfast because you were too young to stay up late.
Yeah, I mean, I had school, so I was 16 when Johnny left on May 22nd, 1992, and I was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I could even tell at that point the cultural relevance that what was going to be leaving the country in popular entertainment. So, yeah, I would watch it on VHS. I still have some of those VHS tapes with Carson, and then I'd watch Letterman as well.
Yeah. What did your parents or the people in your life think about your obsession with Carson?
I was obsessed with all comedy. So
Right.
I was writing the cast of Saturday Night Live, and they were writing me back.
Who wrote you back? Who was the nicest pen pal?
Goodness. Everybody. You could see Sandler right there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Sandler got hired December of 1990, and I was corresponding with him very shortly after, back and forth. And then I got to meet him a couple times, and he was very nice and all this. So, yeah, Phil Hartman would write me back and forth. I saved everything. Everyone from Kevin Nealon to I mean, it was usually like David Spade. Farley. I have Farley like his first or second month that he was on, because in the beginning, these people are not famous at all.
Right.
America really takes like a year or so to get over with the public. So I wrote Farley, I think, probably right after Chippendales. And he got back to me, and it was really, really cool. And then I got to ultimately go to the show and meet all these people in person and get photos with them. So, and then I was driving 3.5 hours also to go to Dave Letterman's 12:30 show on NBC. So that was like incredible for me to do that in 1992 and 93. So I was just in comedy, but they kind of had a lot of information on Saturday Night Live. I still have lots of questions, but with Carson, it was almost a mystery. So that's why I went down that rabbit hole.
Was part of it to see, not just to learn about him, but also to see what is it that I'm connecting to? What made him so unique and special?
I think so, because I would sit down with these people and they said it was like the best time in their lives, and they'd cry just about how much the show meant to them, how much he meant to them. It was definitely surprising, because the media made him out to be cold and aloof, and I was bracing myself for the negative stories. And I have to tell you, Dennis, they did not come. I could not believe the people that were friends with him. Maybe they were just really loyal and they hadn't talked publicly, but the people told me that he was almost the same Carson on and off screen if you were his friend. Now, there was a small group of people he trusted, but they all told me that, and that shocked me. So I was waiting for the negativity. I was bracing myself. I was really afraid, but yeah, I was shocked when I did talk to the people about how wonderful he was. He did have a bad time drinking, and he would talk about that on the Tonight Show. If he was drinking, you did not want to be around him.
Well, what was interesting about watching it back then, especially like in the early 70s, and people would just come on with cigarettes. They would come on with booze.
Yeah.
They would like, they would walk out with this stuff, right? Was there a period where they're like, okay, we're going to stop smoking on camera? Was there a mark, or did that just kind of phase out and become?
I think it phased
out of style?
Maybe in the early 80s, it started to phase out. Once in a while, you'd get someone like Betty Davis or Sammy Davis Jr. with the cigarette, right, and they weren't going to say, no, you can't smoke.
Right.
But Johnny would take puffs during the commercials, and if there was a close-up on a guest and he knew he could get away with it, he'd take a puff here and there. But back in New York, I mean, it was the smoking, the drinking. Johnny was drinking vodka. The show when it began was an hour and 45 minutes. So he'd have a mug of vodka for that hour 45. And yeah, the alcohol definitely, there were some issues with it. There was a big fight with Marlon Brando, who had way too much to drink backstage, and Zsa Zsa Gabor. And then another fight with Paul Williams, the singer, and George Papard, A-Team, Breakfast at Tiffany. So alcohol definitely could influence the show.
When I heard in your book, I've been listening to the audio, and
oh, cool.
What comes across is your enthusiasm and your affection. It's really winning.
Yeah.
I really like
Thank you.
That you did a great job with that. But the hour 45 thing, their ability to sort of vamp, to sort of just schmooze and talk. I think if we'd watched it today, it would feel like, oh, this isn't the pace we're used to today in
That's
society.
Right.
But when you go back and look at those hour 45 ones, how do they feel?
It feels that like somebody, Johnny was 36 at the time, and that he was putting all his energy into this show. I mean, I know this now, but I can watch this, that this guy was pacing his energy all throughout the day until that, and he gave it his all. And by the end, you can tell sometimes he's a little bit just tired. I mean, one of his competitors said it was more exhausting doing 90 minutes than shoveling snow for 8 hours. I mean, the amount of energy, people have no idea how exhausting it was. That's what Gary Shandling said, guest hosting that show. So, it was a marathon. I mean, Carson was doing an hour 45, then it went down to 90, and finally around 1980, it went down to an hour.
Yeah, I remember those changes and those switches. I mean, when I was a kid, I had cut out a cartoon from like some magazine or whatever, and it was a man sitting on the couch, and he said, "Helen, come quick. Johnny Carson is on the Johnny Carson show." Because by that point, he had become famous for like leaving for weeks at a time and doing guest hosts, and that was kind of the shtick. But the idea that I liked that idea and that joke so much that I would cut it out and put it on a bulletin board, and I still remember it.
Ed McMahon in the warm-up, if Johnny was going to be there, said, "I have a surprise for you. The person whose name appears in the title of the program is actually going to host his own show." But the problem with Carson is he just did not have the energy in his 60s. That's why he was only doing 3 nights a week. It wasn't out of laziness. He did not have enough energy, and he didn't want the performance to suffer. But if you did tune into the Tonight Show, you never knew if you were going to get Johnny, if you were going to get David Letterman, Joan Rivers, Kermit the Frog, Lorne Greene from Bonanza. I mean, it was Diana Ross. You just never knew.
Yeah. And the amount of people that he broke. I saw the performer Charo 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
Perform here at Pepperdine University.
Whoa.
Yeah, she's still killing it. She still looks like Charo. She's got a ton of energy. She's dancing around. She's singing. She plays flamenco guitar like it's nobody's business. She's sensational. But she told an anecdote about she goes, "I was on the Carson show," and I was like, "This was 2 nights ago," and people are still talking about what a difference that he made in their career. Right. Who were the performers like Bette Midler you write about in your book? Who were the ones that really went from 0 to 100 because of him?
Bette definitely in 1970 is an unknown, and then Johnny took her to Vegas to open up, and the audiences just were puzzled. And Carson knew it would just take America a little time to figure out Bette. But, I mean, when they did, I mean, she was a sensation. You know, Jimmy Buffett told me it was the biggest break of his career. He said, "Mark, in 1981, I couldn't get booked on television until Johnny." He's like, "You're the first one that's ever asked me about Carson." And he was really excited to tell the story. You know, there was a gentleman, I think this was 74 or 73, Freddie Prinze, who was a 20-year-old comedian. And he makes his debut, and within 6 months has the #1 sitcom in America,
Chico and the Man. Yeah.
Complete unknown. Dave Letterman, within 4 months, was guest hosting The Tonight Show as an unknown, which had never happened before. And before he knows it, he gets his own show on NBC, a morning show, and that parlays into the 12:30 show that Carson produced. So, yeah, a lot of comedians. I mean, it did change their lives. Comedians will say a lot of times, I have 2 birthdays. One, the first time I did The Tonight Show with Johnny, and then the real birthday. So, yeah, it was time and time again, the people that were influenced on that show. I mean, they still talk about it to this day. They'll go on the late night shows. Carson hasn't been on in 3 decades, but the host will ask them about going on Carson. It was that special.
Well, he seemed really interested in his guests. He seemed to be really like, oh, this is a special talent. Like he was a fan or an enthusiast, you know. And
he was curious.
He was in a way that I don't know the current landscape. None of those hosts seem to care that much about the guests in that way.
It's tough because right now it's been like this for a while. Normally, the guests are based on how famous they are and sometimes with social media accounts, where Carson just wanted conversationalists. He wouldn't want somebody that's a big movie star that would not be able to be a good guest. Whereas now, if you're an A-list person, they want you no matter what, and it can be very hard for the host, and they're just not good guests. Johnny was just curious. You know, he had a pre-interview set, but he would throw it out a lot and just talk to people. I mean, he was so good with kids, with animals, and also they would bring in these people that weren't even famous. They'd be the first guest. Actress Jennifer Tilly told me about being bumped for the potato chip lady. This is a woman named Myrtle Young. She's 65 in Indiana, and she's a potato chip inspector. She notices the potato chips are in the shape of different objects, goes on Carson's show, and the audience is loving this woman so much that Carson kept her on for all these extra segments. And then she started touring around the country and became a sensation. That wasn't the only one. I talked to a gentleman who calls himself a manualist. He plays music with his hands. He told me after going on Carson, he quit his job as a lawyer and was making more money in Las Vegas because of Carson playing the lounges. So that was the power of Carson.
Well, and he seemed to really want that light to shine on them.
Yeah, he definitely wanted to develop
that part. Yeah.
The comedians would tell me that during the commercials, Johnny would give them suggestions to punch up their material or after the show. So he was definitely nurturing comics.
Well, and also the thing that if he invited you over to the couch, that was a huge thing for someone that had done a stand-up set.
It's true. Yeah, that only happened about 15 times. It took Seinfeld 5 times until he was finally called over. Someone like Dave Letterman was called right away. So it really depended. Ellen was called right away. Leno got a handshake. It took, I think, the second time to get called over. So yeah,
only 15 times that people got called over to the couch.
To my knowledge, only like 15 or 17. It wasn't many. I mean, I have a list somewhere that I made up that I have. But yeah, it wasn't as much as people probably think.
It's interesting to me that Johnny loved Letterman because he really loved him.
He did.
But they're very different hosts. Like Letterman's Johnny really wanted the guests to shine. Letterman, I don't get that feeling so much, but Johnny really wanted to set them up to succeed, to be funny. He wanted the better they looked, the better I think he felt the show was going.
Dennis, basically Carson would tell friends of his, I could never do what Dave does to my audience. They would never accept me being, putting down a guest like that or doing that type of humor. But he loved Dave. At the same time, whenever Letterman or Richard Pryor were on the show, Johnny would get very insecure because these people were really, really funny. So he'd make sure that the material was better, that it was edgier material because he had his peers there. Amazing to me that a guy, maybe the biggest star TV ever produced, was that insecure when he had his peers on, but he wasn't. And he produced Dave's show. Yeah. And he wanted Letterman to succeed to a point. I mean, he put a lot of limitations on Dave to ensure that the ratings did not overtake Carson's show. I mean, he told Dave through NBC's vice president, Dave Tebbutt, no monologue. You can do 4 jokes at the top. You can only have 4 band members, no brass instruments. You have to do the show in New York, which it was less pool of famous people back then. It was harder to get, I guess. So he definitely handcuffed David, and he never, in 11 and a half years or whatever, said, stay tuned for Letterman. So there were definitely, and he wouldn't let Dave do Fridays for 3 years. I think Dave did some specials a couple times a year, which is when the college kids stay up. So Johnny loved Dave, and Dave loved Johnny, but definitely Johnny, the competitiveness you could see in how he kind of ran Dave Letterman's show, produced it.
Well, some of the things you read, and you mentioned this in your book, like, is he aloof off camera? Is he super competitive? Does he have a temper? Is he a drinker? Yeah. It's interesting to me that he knew who to be on camera to be the most winning version of himself. But in other words, he could create it, but it wasn't who he was completely off camera. In some ways, maybe. But you know what I mean? Like he knew the best version, and he could create it on camera.
Doing that show every day and staying competitive for 30 years just wears you out. So that was the time when he could forget about his divorces or whatever bad stuff was going on in his personal life. And he just would get so much adrenaline. They hooked him up to measure his heart before the show, what the rate was, then during the show, and they couldn't believe it. I mean, he put everything into that show, but he was himself out there. You couldn't fool the American public for 30 years and not be yourself. At the same time, he was very shy with people he didn't know. He was reserved. And also, for self-preservation purposes, people told me he just could not be outgoing all the time. I mean, John Lennon, the man who killed Lennon, Mark David Chapman, had a short list of people to kill if it wasn't Lennon, and Johnny Carson was on that list. Shit. I mean, the FBI numerous times had to protect Carson's life, death threats. So Carson had to be very careful. He actually carried a gun. He never used it, but it was he had a license for it.
Wow. That golf swing thing that he did, what do you know about that? It was kind of iconic.
I know it didn't start in the beginning.
Right.
A lot of things evolved. Like, here's Johnny. In the beginning, it was only 2 seconds. And then Ed started putting, it seemed like every year another second until it was like 8 seconds here. So a lot of this stuff organically happened. Like Doc Severinsen one night having like this flashy outfit. Suddenly that's going to be a staple. So I don't know the golf swing. That's a mystery. You know, NBC erased most of the first 10 years of The Tonight Show. So it's hard to know. And Johnny was furious. I mean, that NBC did that, but they did not see the value, and it was bad. So 62 to 72, some things exist, but the vast majority NBC wiped out.
Now, I remember reading in your book that you had like the VHS collections of the best stuff like that. Which tape would you wear out the most? Which one would you go back to?
I was obsessed with his final show and the penultimate, which the penultimate was Bette Midler and Robin Williams. And it was like the best late night show ever. And Bette Midler won an Emmy singing to Johnny at the end. And the clips of the final show and just Johnny saying goodbye to America. I think the comedians, he actually in retirement picked those clips himself. I mean, he was so hands-on. That's why when I talk to people, when I was talking to some of those 400 people, I would tell them they were on the best of. I'm like, Carson picked that himself. I mean, out of 25,000 guests, I mean, it speaks volumes. I mean, that when Johnny picked a clip like that.
You're interviewing like 400 people.
Yeah.
Who got the most emotional? What interview was the most like, gotcha, a lump in your throat moment?
I had people that were really emotional. Stephen Wright, who the comedian out of Boston, who got called over to the couch. Drew Carey got very emotional in between tapings of The Price is Right. We were at CBS Television City telling me his story. Byron Allen, the mogul comedian, he was 18 when he went on the show, and he was telling he was telling it. He had tears in his eyes. I mean, that was happening for a while with the comedians, and it was just people just are reliving this time in their lives, and the guy just meant so much. I mean, I had a comedian also emotion tell me Johnny saved his life from drugs, that he probably would have died, but Johnny was one of 3 people that saved his life. So these are the stories I got from people.
Yeah. I put on Facebook that I was interviewing you, that somebody, and I was just like, what do we remember about Carson? And I'm going to read you a few of those things.
Okay.
One thing that one of my friends reminded me about, and I forgot about this, is, do you know a comedian named Bob Smith?
See, I don't believe Bob Smith went on Carson. I know that I might say that online that he did, but to my knowledge, there was a writer, Bob Smith, but it was a different man than who you're
Oh,
saying.
That's interesting, because I was friends with Bob Smith. He's sadly no longer with us. He used to say that was part of his bio, that he was the first out gay comedian to go on Carson.
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly Carson had guests that he knew were gay, like Charles Nelson Riley and other people like that, and Lily Tomlin, people kind of knew behind the scenes. So that wasn't an issue. I mean, Carson's assistant in New York in the 60s had a partner, and Johnny met them, and Johnny stayed friends with them up until he passed away. So, but yeah, I did see that the Bob Smith thing, and yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a couple of people that were in the audience for the final show, and one posted I was at Johnny's last 2 shows ever, and Jay Leno's first one, and it's my friend Moss, and he posted like this. It looks like a ticket in like plexiglass, or like it's mounted, like it's preserved for time.
That was the last show. You had to know somebody to get in. I mean, you had to be a relative or a friend of the show. So Moss, wow, you lived my dream.
I know. Sis Boom Ba, one of the funniest Karnak moments ever. I don't know the setup.
Okay, so Kevin Mulholland, one of Johnny's writers, came up with this. So it was a Karnak bit where Johnny would come up with the answer. He would guess what the answer was, and it was Sis Boom Ba, and then he tears open the envelope. What would the sound of an exploding sheep sound like? Because Sis Boom Ba was a popular cheerleading chant.
Yeah.
So Sis Boom Ba. Yeah. So that's a very famous joke. And Carson and Ed McMahon are like laughing like little kids for like a minute. That was 83, I believe.
Yeah. One of my friend Eleanor wrote, Sis Boom Ba, one of the funniest Karnak moments ever. And then my friend John Hardy wrote, I remember watching that the night it aired. Hysterical.
Whoa.
one of my dominant thoughts when I think of Johnny is him cracking up. Like he was generally tickled and like almost in a little boyish way, the way he would laugh at when things were funny at other people. Like he was sometimes almost helpless with laughter.
It's true. I mean, he loved laughing, and he didn't have to tap the comedians. He was secure enough. Some hosts need to be funnier than the guest if they're a comedian or whatever, and Johnny was fine to sit back and get a night off and let Don Rickles, Buddy Hackett, or Joan Rivers take the stage and just be an audience member. But you're right. The laughter was infectious, and it was all genuine.
What was the dynamic like between Ed McMahon and Johnny Carson?
In the beginning, they were friends. I mean, Johnny and Ed were on a game show on ABC called Who Do You Trust? And they were together for a bunch of years. Carson got the Tonight Show. He turned it down for a bunch of reasons. And finally, his wife was able to convince him to take the gig. And he wasn't going to take Ed McMahon because he wanted to start fresh. I mean, this was a big deal taking over for the biggest star in TV at the time, one of the biggest, Jack Parr. So Carson was going to bring his friend from L.A., but his friend didn't want to relocate to New York. So Ed McMahon took Carson to a dinner and got on his hands and knees and with tears down his face begged Johnny to take him. And Johnny's, fine, I'll take you, Ed, I'll take it. The best move Ed McMahon ever did, it was 30 years of employment. Now, in New York, they would go out a lot of times after the show and hang out and go to bars. Carson would talk on the show about being a bad drinker. Ed helped him get home many, many times. They were really there for one another. And then in 1972, when they moved out west, it was a little bit different. They would get together on birthdays and anniversaries, but they definitely were not as close. And I know Ed would have wanted it to be maybe a little bit closer. Johnny went on vacation with Doc Severinsen, and I don't think he ever went on vacation with Ed, to my knowledge. Maybe in the New York 60s, possibly. But by the time they got to California, that was not going to happen.
Yeah. I love that he had a gay assistant in New York and a male gay person.
There were a bunch of people. I mean, one of his favorite people was an NBC a vice president named Jay Michaels, and he would write these memos, and they were the most now somebody would get fired for them, but they were so filthy and gossipy, and you'd get fired now. But Carson and everyone at NBC would collect them. They were collector's items almost, because this guy had such a gift. And he was gay, and he unfortunately had an untimely death. And Carson, the next night, talked about him at the end of the show and did kind of a tribute to him. But Carson, he was definitely very open-minded like that.
Well, and also you write about this in the book, in terms of the racial stuff that was going on in the country, and having Harry Belafonte guest hosts and things like that, which at the time were pretty progressive steps forward. Can you talk about that part of his personality? Johnny
thought that it would be a mistake for him to give his political opinions, to take sides. Why alienate half my audience? So he would put people on like Joan Baez, or I'll give my show for a week to Harry Belafonte in February of 1968, who can book Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy. All these people, NBC was terrified. They said to Harry Belafonte, "Now, you're not going to ask Dr. King about racism, are you?" And he said, "No, I'm going to ask him about opera." Of course I am. So, Johnny was good to put on like people like Gore Vidal, who he was friends with. He actually went to Rome and stayed with Gore Vidal and his partner. They were there at least once or twice with Vidal. They were really, really friends.
Hanging out with them. Interesting. Yeah. When you think of Johnny, you just think of him on that show. So the idea that he had a career before that, and you write about that, like the kind of act he would do. He did magic sometimes. If you went to see Johnny Carson before The Tonight Show, what was his act?
From the time he was 14, he was performing. By the time he got The Tonight Show at 36, he had so much practice. I mean, he was doing a magic act in Nebraska, and then that parlayed into ventriloquism, and then radio and early TV in Nebraska. And then he went out west, and then he did a local show, and that's when he got kind of his big break, and then did a national show. It's kind of like very similar to what he ended up doing on The Tonight Show in some aspects with some of the things. And then, he got the game show gig, but it wasn't always easy. I mean, when he had a show that got canceled, and then his agents kind of disappeared or were ignoring him, and he had all going broke. So there was definitely a struggle with Carson, but he was so ambitious. When he was 17, he graduated high school and hitchhiked all the way to Los Angeles to go to Jack Benny's house. He bought a star map and just showed outside his idol's house. Benny never went outside, but they became friends years later. But Carson was very ambitious.
Well, and you write about his military time in World War II and this one harrowing thing that he had to do. Can you talk about that?
He was in the Navy, and there were dead bodies, and he was there. It was, I forget how many soldiers, lost their lives. So he saw a lot of things at a very early age. He enlisted when he was 17 years old, and those things just never left him. I mean, it was really, really tough. And then he came back and then went to college. But during that time, he was doing ventriloquism, doing comedy on the ship for people, and it was a big government. If it was Forrestal, I think it was like secretary of somebody. I forget who it was. Robert Forrestal. It was a big commander, and I know Johnny did ventriloquism for him, and that was a big deal. So yeah, Carson really felt that was what he was good at, and he didn't like to do things he wasn't good at. So when he found something, he was going to do it all the way.
What pissed him off? Because he had a temper, but what was it? What were the kinds of things that would tip
bad manners? Bad manners. Somebody like Jerry Lewis berating staff members and being rude to his staff. He banned Jerry Lewis. A guest that would turn their back to Johnny and just ignore him and talk to the previous guest and ignore Johnny. He didn't like that. He thought that was poor manners. It's basically Carson thought, I'm inviting you into my home. You're a guest, and he expected people to be on good manners. I mean, William Shatner wouldn't let Carson get a word in for 2.5 minutes. There was a dull story going nowhere. So that was strike one. Strike two is he turned his back on Carson to talk to the previous guest. And then three, back then, Carson would say, my next guest is on Saturday nights at this time on the show TJ Hooker. Please welcome on another network. And then Shatner says, watch me on ABC on Saturday, and mention the network. They had to bleep it out. So it's 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah.
Carl Sagan, the astronomer he was friends with, and Sagan, after a bunch of appearances, over a dozen, interrupted Johnny twice to correct him. And he just very sensitive. And the way that Sagan did it, he banned him from the show. So those are a few of unfortunately many. He was so hurt when Dana Carvey started doing the Saturday Night Live sketches parodying him. In the beginning, he didn't think it was mean-spirited and he was fine, but he started playing Johnny senile and just really out of touch, and Johnny banned Dana Carvey, and it was one of the factors why Johnny retired. He did not want to be perceived as old hat, like someone like Bob Hope who stuck around too long. So very shortly after one of the Carson sketches, Carcinio, it was a week later, 5 days later, he announced his retirement and shocked NBC. But he was walking through the halls. Jay Leno heard him say, if they're going to make fun of me, it's time to retire.
Wow, he really was thin-skinned in that way. With these moments where he would find somebody rude, could you tell if you were watching it, or would it be like during the commercial?
I could tell in terms of, I think it was over the audience's head a lot, but he would just get really quiet and a little bit stone-faced and a little bit more sarcastic than he might, some tension in his neck. But yeah, I could tell a lot of the time where if somebody says something that he deemed just something inappropriate, like Brad Garrett got banned from the show for saying an ad lib, which was, I have sperm bigger than Tommy Newsom. Tommy Newsom was one of the band members, and he thought that was, and then Ellen DeGeneres, unfortunately, got banned from Carson's show for doing a joke that they told her not to do that Johnny thought would be offensive to a part of his audience. So,
and she did it anyway. And Ellen did.
She did.
What was the show? Do you remember?
The show was live to tape, so unless it was a swear word or whatever, they'd beep that. But if not, it would get in. To my knowledge, I believe it was a joke, a religious joke, and I think to my knowledge, that it was. She did it on her debut. She got called over to the couch by doing a phone call to God routine, which was approved. It was very much like Bob Newhart routine, and it was good. She was saying that her observation was that I'm a godmother to a 10-year-old. I have them call me God for short, Now, Carson was not religious. He was a humanist, did not believe in God whatsoever. However, he knew that he had a lot of people that were religious that watched the show that would flood the lines at NBC protesting and writing letters when they would do religious stuff. So they just told Ellen, don't do it, and she did it. And she got a laugh out of it, but it was once something like that with the trust, when it's broken, it was pretty much over.
If you were banned, is there a list of banned people, or if everybody knew on the show?
I do want to say that I do want to say Ellen did come back with Leno as guest host. Like, so there was a degree of ban. Some people were like, "You're never coming back." Yeah. Other people could go back with guest host, but not Johnny. Yeah. I have the most complete list. It's like 30 people. To my knowledge, it was never a physical list, but 2 people, including Rich Little and Burt Reynolds, they both say they saw actually a list of names that were written down, people that were no books. But I put together something like, it's like 30 people that were no-goes.
Persona non grata.
The various reasons why, Kevin Nealon did a joke about drunk driving, and he didn't know that Carson had gotten arrested for drinking and driving like a year or two prior, a couple of years prior. So that did him. And he was allowed to go with guest hosts, but it was just stuff like that. Some of it was probably not a big deal, and Johnny might have been in a bad mood or whatever. But David Letterman was always so scared that he was going to say something to get on that list. So he was just always on his best behavior. He would kid Johnny and joke with him, but he always walked a fine line.
I want to talk about Joan Rivers, because I worked as a writer on Fashion Police. Yeah. And, Joan was a big sensation on the Tonight Show, and then guest hosted for a long time, and then they had a falling out. You've probably talked to a lot of people and done a ton of research. Yeah. What's your take on the Joan journey of it all?
Okay, so 1965, Miss Rivers debuts. I think it was in February. It was in the winter. Almost suddenly, they're touting her as the next Carol Burnett, Walter Winchell, all these newspaper columnists. She's back with Carson within like 10 days, and it was unbelievable. I mean, they had her on as a female comedy writer. She was writing for Alan Funt, Candid Camera, quits her job as the writer, and now has this amazing career. And Johnny loved her, would put her on all the time. And then in the early 80s, for the very first time in the history of the Tonight Show, had a permanent guest host. People like David Brenner and all these people were guest hosting, gave it to Joan Rivers. So Joan was now the permanent guest host. By doing that, she broke Frank Sinatra's record. I think it was at a hotel either in Atlantic City or Vegas, but it was some sort of residency. I mean, her money went up, her fame when she was doing that, the permanent guest host. So unfortunately, this is at least from people that I talked to and my reading and my research. In 1985, Joan Rivers and her husband Edgar, they had their lawyer go to Fox, Barry Diller, who was the head of Fox, and see if there was any interest in her having her own show. There was lots of interest. Barry Diller signed Miss Rivers to a contract. I think it would have been in February. I sat down with Barry Diller here in New York. Barry said, I told Joan, you owe it to Johnny to tell him you were going to be competing against him. Do not blindside him. Barry Diller said, I'm in a poker game with Johnny. I'm friends with him. You need to tell him. Edgar, Joan's husband, said there are going to be unforeseen circumstances. Don't tell Johnny. And she wanted to be a good wife. Edgar took care of all the business. And then they were still in negotiations to keep guest hosting The Tonight Show with Carson Productions. Johnny owned The Tonight Show. And she had signed a deal already with Fox, and she was still in these negotiations for nothing. I mean, she wouldn't be able to guest host. So Johnny, when he found out from Brandon Tartikoff, couldn't believe Joan didn't tell him, and that she would still go into these fake negotiations knowing that instead of just saying, I'm going to be getting my own show. Anybody that went to Johnny and said, I'm going to be getting my own show, I was offered my show opposite you. Johnny said, you have my blessing. Then their shows would inevitably fail, and then Johnny would have them back on the show. Peter LaSalle, and Joan admits this was Johnny's prize producer. Joan called up Peter and tried to take Peter over to her show at Fox. Every talent coordinator was offered double their salary to go with Joan, and Johnny just could not believe that Joan was just trying to take his staff. It was like one thing after another where he was just baffled. And, he never said anything bad about her on The Tonight Show. When he was asked during a commercial, I think it was the first show back after the Miss Rivers did her press conference, what do you think of Joan Rivers? All he said was, I wish her the best. I mean, he really did take the high road. He didn't want to be in a back and forth kind of feud. Miss Rivers, said people that are going to go on my show are going to be blackballed from the Tonight Show. And it's like Michael J. Fox went on your show and went back to Carson. Mel Brooks, all these people. Johnny did not care. He was hurt. The relationship was over. But yeah, he was fine.
Wow, that's so interesting because I've worked with her and kind of would hear things about that. And I think she did a bit on a reality show later about him. And
yeah, she did. People will be like, yeah, she went to Johnny's grave. And I said, Johnny was cremated. That is a park in Burbank, Johnny Carson Park, where she did visit. They have a statue of Carson. But yeah, she was such a phenomenal talent. I mean, unbelievable talent, and it's amazing her resiliency. I mean, she, her husband takes his life. She finds out she's millions in debt and is able to bounce back at a level that was most people would not be able to. I give her a lot of credit. She did also mention one of the reasons she didn't tell Johnny is because she knew that if she told Johnny, the guest hosting gig would have stopped, which is true. That February when she signed with Fox, Johnny would have said, "You have my blessing," but he wouldn't have her guest host anymore. So that was another reason that she said that she didn't tell Johnny.
Yeah, complicated, right?
Yeah.
What was the hardest interview to do? Who was the most angry, or who were you like? Ooh, this was.
See, the angry
surprising.
people wouldn't talk to me. The only people that had issues. I've met Miss Rivers. I met Joan twice, and she wouldn't talk to me for this, which is fine. I get that. I asked Melissa Rivers several times if she would talk to me, and some of Miss Rivers' friends. And the people that had problems were like Wayne Newton wouldn't talk to me. There aren't many people. It's like one hand, those people. So people weren't really angry. I'm trying to think. You asked about the most emotional,
right? You talked about the people that got emotional, but was there any contentious people that were like, that were angry or didn't like him?
I was waiting for it, and it did not happen. They said that he was a bad drunk, and there were a couple of times when he was drinking that I went, well, I didn't get it from anyone. I was bracing myself, and I tried anybody that had a problem with this guy. I reached out to, and I said, will you talk to me? So the 400 people I talked to, I mean, this is the Carson I got from him. I mean, Mr. Wayne Newton tells his story, and I in the book go into, at least from Carson's point of view, what actually did happen with that. So there were only a handful of people that had real problems with him. Joan Rivers we just talked about. But in terms of emotion, Carson, there was a gentleman who has a book out, and Howard Smith, he was not famous. He was a friend, next door neighbors with Carson. They lived in Malibu, and just was really with Carson up until Carson passed away. I mean, he was smoking 2 packs of unfiltered Pall Mall cigarettes since he was 14 years old, and it was just really, really sad. He was on oxygen the last couple of days, and this was one of his best friends, and just kind of being there for Johnny and who Johnny. I mean, I talk in the book about the John Club. If you were Johnny's friend, he was not Johnny. He was John. Sinatra would do that. Rickles, Newhart. He was John. And talking to people like that, David Steinberg, that were friends with the man. There was definitely emotion. They miss him to this day. Doc Severinsen got very emotional, saying, "Every day I think about him, and I always think in situations, what would Johnny do?" Yeah.
You write about him being from the Midwest and that being part of his charm, and sort of that Midwest, polite, friendly,
that's right,
amiable. Can you talk about that? Like, what was that part of his appeal? Like, how did that affect the show?
Midwestern manners were such a big deal. It never occurred to me in retirement that I could write Johnny Carson a letter, and he, as being very polite, would actually write me back and sign his own mail and answer it. I mean,
he wrote you letters back.
He wrote anybody. It didn't occur to me. I thought I'd have a secretary fake an autograph. No, Johnny signed everything himself. If somebody wrote him a letter, he would read it, and he would dictate to his secretary what to write, and he would sign the letter as himself. Helen Sanders, his assistant for 18 years, told me I never signed Johnny's name once. I mean, Carson, that was that was him being polite. He bonded with people like Dick Cavett from Nebraska. You could always tell Johnny would just get very sentimental when you had Marlon Brando was another Nebraskan that Johnny was friends with. So he kind of bonded with these people, the Nebraskans. But when Johnny broke Judy Garland's record in Vegas, when he started doing his show at the Sahara Hotel, if there were somebody in Nebraska that would send a note backstage, can you give this to Johnny? And these people were like, it'll never get to Johnny. And it said, I'm from Nebraska, I'm from Norfolk or close by. He'd have them come back after the show. The usher would get them and bring him back. And they were stunned that one of maybe the most famous man in America would just do that. But that was him being polite and just him really loving being around the people he grew up with.
Yeah. And what did he say in the letters back to you when he would write you? Was it multiple letters?
I didn't get anything back because it didn't occur to me to write him.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
People would send him stuff to sign. He'd sign anything that people wanted.
Yeah.
They would ask him questions about his favorite show or like, did this happen or what? And he would have his dictate to his secretary. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that got handwritten letters from him. I know his handwriting very well. It just never occurred to me. I mean, he was in Santa Monica from the show ends in May of '92, and they had an office there for a long time. I think maybe till 2002, something like that. And Johnny, it was just a place for him to go. They would license clips. He would pick out clips. And he always he would get pitched to do so many shows, and he always would consider it things and say, you know what, I did it. I'm done.
What strikes me is when you said this, how old was he when he retired?
He was 66. I believe he was 66, maybe 67. This was May of 92. He was born October 23rd, 1925.
Right. A few years older than I am now, and he retires from The Tonight Show. Like, that's striking to me. Like, he could have milked that for another decade if he wanted to.
I think he wanted to. I think there were a couple factors. One, he did not like the Saturday Night Live sketches, and he thought that the young people think of me as kind of out of date and old fashioned and just not cool. The second was NBC moving the Tonight Show from 11:30 to 11:35. He thought that was a big disadvantage for people that were used to 11:30. He thought he was not being treated well with the network. And he really did foresaw that all these people were going to be getting their own late night show. I mean, he tried to tell Chevy Chase, Chevy, do you really want to do your own late night show on Fox 5 nights a week? How difficult it is. Try to kind of caution Chevy against it. And he lasted, I think, was it 26 episodes on Fox, something like that, the Chevy Chase show. So he definitely foresaw that there was going to be a lot of competition. So yeah, he got out at 66. I think he probably could have stayed a little bit longer, but he was the king of late night, and for him to have his ratings to become number two, I couldn't see him putting himself in a situation like that. Like Arsenio was his competition, but Arsenio never took over Johnny in terms of ratings. I mean, definitely Arsenio and Dave Letterman were the ones that the critics and the younger people thought would consider hip, but Carson just didn't want to stick around too long. He thought Lucille Ball, Jack Benny, all these people stayed way too long, and so he got out. And for 2 years, he did an appearance on The Simpsons, the American Teacher Awards, Bob Hope's 90th birthday. He goes to the White House, Presidential Medal of Honor from George Herbert Walker Bush. And then May of 1994, almost 2 years to the day or the month at least, when he retired, he did a walk-on. It was his last public appearance on Dave Letterman's show. Dave was broadcasting from a television city in Los Angeles, and Johnny came on unannounced, and the crowd it was deafening. Everyone to their feet. And Johnny sits down at Dave's desk, which wasn't scripted, and you can tell Johnny's trying to get the crowd to stop so he could do a joke or ad-lib, and they just wouldn't stop. And finally, Johnny said, okay, and just walks off. And then we never saw him again.
And that was it. Wow. Yeah. There was another anecdote earlier in the book that I just flashed into my mind. I did a deep dive into Marlene Dietrich a few years ago for a project that I was working on. But she would do these shows at the Hollywood Canteen during World War II, and they're washing the dishes, and it's a very like Hollywood supporting the war effort. And I guess Johnny had a memorable experience at that venue with Orson Welles and Dietrich, and I was just like,
that's right, fuck. Rita Hayworth as well, and Orson Welles. Yeah, he hitchhiked. That's when he would hitchhike. He graduates at 17. He enlisted with the Navy, but he's not officially with the Navy. Gets to L.A., and he goes to a uniform store and gets the whole naval uniform so he can go to the USO shows. And he danced with Miss Dietrich, and he participated in a magic trick with Orson Welles. He could not believe that he was there. Then eventually he got busted. I think night number 3, he kept going back every night, and they asked him for his papers, and he didn't have them, and they threw him in Navy jail. I don't know what it's called. Then his aunt and uncle had to come and bail him out. I think it was like $50 or something like that. But yeah, those memories. And then of course Orson Welles then, coming on the show and guest hosting the show, and Johnny becoming friends with him. It was a big deal.
Yeah, I just, growing up in the 70s, like all of those George Gobel and all of these people that were Buddy Hackett and Soupy Sales, all these people that were just on the game shows and the TV shows and the Tonight Show, boozing it up, martinis, plaid sports coats, cigarette smoke.
Paul Lynde.
Big cars, it's a 70s aesthetic that I just feel like I guess it's part of my background. It's like it feels close to my heart in a way, just from watching it on television.
Yeah, those game shows, the panels with some of them are unbelievable, like Richard Dawson and Joanne Worley, and just really fun combinations. And Paul Lynde, and the stuff can get really risque. I don't know if some of the stuff that they said could be broadcast and on network television now during the daytime, but they would get certain things past the censors. But it was really, really fun watching all those people back then, because if you were famous, for the most part, the public knew who you were. And just with cable, it just got to be so many more celebrities. And now with the internet, it's just impossible to keep track of everybody. But back in the 80s, especially if you were on network television and there weren't many options other than, 3 networks, a UHF and maybe PBS. I talk to people I'm friends with now, and they would leave and just walk around. And if you were on network TV, 40 million people watching you, it was insanity. I mean, they couldn't walk down the street without people coming up to them. And if that was the power of network TV and being famous back then.
Yeah. Some of the women that pop up in your book, people like Carol Wayne that you would see on Carson or Charo even. What was his vibe with women? Like, he made them stars, some of them, but he didn't seem to have like an off-screen dark part around that, or like, what was his vibe with beautiful women that would come on the show?
I think as long as somebody was a good storyteller and they could talk, and if he thought that certain comics were funny, he was all for it. Maureen Murphy, this Australian comedian who did the show 12 times, she debuted, I think, in 1980. It was the only person that got that Johnny signed to a development deal for Carson Productions to get her own show. None of the other comics. I mean, Johnny just thought she was the funniest, one of the funniest people he ever saw, and picked her clips to be in the VHS DVD best of. I mean, if they were entertaining, like Carol Wayne she was really, really smart, by the way. She would kind of come off a little ditzy.
Yeah, that was kind of her persona. Yeah.
I think he liked strong women. I mean, he would put on, people like Joan Baez. He would put people on like Diane Keaton. I mean, he wasn't afraid to put, Gloria Steinem, a lot of more controversial people. He put on, she was at the time called the most hated woman in America, Madalyn Murray O'Hara, who was an atheist. And back then, if you said you were an atheist in America, I mean, it was definitely, they got lots of letters with people that were upset. I mean, in New York, Carson put on the head of the Church of Satan. They put a lot of people on the show with very unique and different ideas. But yeah, I don't think he definitely dated some of the women that he had on the show. Diane Cannon, Sally Field for a little bit, Morgan Fairchild. So yeah, there would be some in between marriages that would happen sometimes.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking of marriages, you dedicate the book to your wife.
I had to.
Yes. What does she think of the Carson-ness of you?
I don't know. I just think Christine encourages my curiosity. The whole thing was curiosity. About what went on with the show. I mean, it wasn't until Johnny's last show for 7 minutes that they kind of took cameras behind the scenes, but I had so many more questions. So yeah, Christine's been really supportive. I mean, she went out in LA with me and around New York. I mean, we couldn't when I started the podcast and was doing it, we couldn't do it remotely like this. So I was going to people's homes and offices. I mean, she was with me in Mel Brooks's office in Culver City. I mean, she was with me here in New York with all these people, big names, and we would sit down with them. And it was really, really special. I was so bad with tech. I only had one microphone. I didn't know how to set up two. So I'd go back and forth. So they'd have to sit like near me. And there was this rapport that just kind of developed accidentally. But she was very, very supportive with me doing this.
I love the one mic thing. When I started this podcast, it was not my strong suit. Still, I'm still not the best, but
I think you're great. It just takes a little time.
Yeah.
My audience early on, constructive criticism, I didn't realize I was interrupting so much, and some podcasters and interviewers do that. So I took the note, and I really did try. I would bite my lip sometimes when I wanted to interject, but just tried to let them, even if it was like 2 or 3 minutes, a little long-winded, let them until they were done before I said anything.
I'm sure you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
What did Johnny Carson mean to America? What was the connection there? Like he was an institution in a way, but there was something very American about it.
People really thought this guy was his friend. They would write letters. They would send food to him. When things were going really rough in America, they would go to their friend Johnny at 11:30 as they were sleeping under the covers. And just, it was comfort. When Muhammad Ali, I think it was 67 or 68, knew in Texas he was going to go to jail for, he wasn't going to enlist in the military.
Right.
And they were going to put him. Howard Cosell goes into his hotel room the night before he knows he's going to be going to jail. He opens Ali's room and he sees Ali under the covers watching Johnny Carson. Now that speaks volumes to me, at least. I mean, he was a
comfort
of comfort.
It was a comfort before bedtime. Like at the end of the day, yeah.
And like Martin Luther King Jr., when he lost his life, Carson did a tribute show with Diana Ross and Sammy Davis Jr., and they showed Mr. Belafonte's, with Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy lived in the same building as Johnny at the UN Plaza. Bobby Kennedy would go to Johnny's office. They were friends. So Johnny was really shooken up. 1968 was really, really tough. Vietnam. So they did a Bobby Kennedy tribute show. Johnny got a bunch of people together without an audience, no monologue, and they just, remembered their friend.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I have a couple more questions for you, but tell people where they can find the book. Anything else you want to promote about it? The podcast. Anything you want to promote? Yeah.
So the book is called Love Johnny Carson. It's available Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, wherever you buy books. I did for over 5 days. I recorded the audio version that's available Audible or wherever you get audio.
Yeah, it's good.
Books.
I'm listening to it now. It's awesome.
I did my best. I know that some of my pronunciations are a little off, but I did do my best. But yeah, the book, people really like it. I talked to over 400 people, the writers, Johnny's writers, his personal assistants, the guy who held the curtain open for Johnny, I interviewed. So people like Mel Brooks, who was on Johnny's very first show, October 1st, 1962, Carol Burnett. So it is the most definitive of Johnny's Tonight Show, and we go way more in depth than anybody in the retirement years. And I'm really happy to hear the feedback from someone like Dick Cavett that really, really liked the book. It meant a lot to me. So that's going on. I hope people check that out. And I also do a podcast for latenighter.com, and it's called Inside Late Night with Mark Malkoff, where I interview people from late night, people on late night shows like Saturday Night Live, Letterman. It doesn't matter what, but if they were on a late night show, we do that, and it's been fun. I've had some really great guests.
I love that. Do you have any collectibles related to Carson? Do you have any like stuff from this Tonight Show set, or like what do you have?
I do. I have some pencils because he had the double-sided pencils that were used on the show. I have a couple cards that were on his desk from a comedy routine when he did blue cards. I have mugs. They were never sold to the public that were Johnny would drink from a mug with his photo on it, and I have like one or two of the mugs at least. I have a handwritten letter that Johnny wrote to one of his best friends, and Hank Sims, and one of Hank's children gave me the letter, which was really, really cool that I have that. I have just, the invite that Johnny gave to the staff for the rap party after the show. Johnny took a helicopter back to Malibu because it was a circus outside NBC. Oh my goodness. And they had a rap party at Carson's home. He had everyone come in. And, so I have that. I have to think, some people have given me some graphics, some props that Carson held up. So, And some anniversary gifts that Carson gave to the staff. I have to go back and look, but those are some things that I do have. Oh, Carson's handwritten notes on a sketch, because he would rewrite stuff, and one of the writers gave me, and I know Johnny's writing very, very well. So that was really cool to see his edits.
Is his handwriting cool and legible? And like, you know how sometimes people just have cool handwriting?
Yeah. I can read it, but there's definitely times where people have asked me if I can decipher it, and I'm very good at it. Sometimes it takes me a little bit of time. But yeah, his handwriting wasn't always see, people sometimes sell the notes on eBay, and you can see his writing. He really did come from an old school where you write thank you notes if somebody sends you gives you a gift or whatever. He would, he had these personal assistants, and he would write notes to them. Great job, I'm grateful for you, and to people like that. So yeah, it's fun to see sometimes when a note I've never seen pops up here and there, but I'm happy to have a couple of them.
Yeah,
or one of them.
We mentioned the golf swing earlier. Was he a good golfer?
No, and his son, Chris, was a golf pro. Johnny, he tried to bond with his son golfing, and he was so bad that he threw his clubs and said, I'm never doing this again. if there was something that he was not good at, he said he was just good at the Tonight Show. He was a frustrated tennis player. He would throw his racket. He loved tennis. But he knew that he just, he was decent. Like, he'd play with people like Steve Lawrence. He played with Rob Reiner, Ricardo Montalban. He was pretty good. But he always wished he'd be better. But he was good enough that he felt he could do that. But he wanted to be a singer, actually. But he knew that he couldn't get to the level of his friend Steve Lawrence. So that was definitely something that he would do once in a while on the show. But if he did, he would prepare for weeks and sometimes months for something like that. When he played Willie Nelson, when they had Julio Iglesias on and they did a duet, people thought at first it was Willie Nelson. It was actually Johnny dressed as Willie Nelson. They did a duet. Johnny spent weeks preparing with a vocal coach to do that. So he was good when he went out there, but he needed the preparation.
Yeah. It seems like he was really afraid of being embarrassed or doing something that's embarrassing.
Yes.
Like, more than other performers
right.
might be, right?
Him and David Letterman, both, for whatever reason, you would think, they could poke fun at public figures, that they both wouldn't be as sensitive as they are. But that's a very astute observation. I'm glad that Dennis, that you noticed that.
Yeah, it's just something that's coming through in our conversation.
It's true.
A couple more things. You embarked on this podcast. You ended up writing this book. I think there was a curiosity that drove it. What did you learn?
I learned that writing a book was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I am grateful that I learned the power of asking has been kind of a theme in my life. I contacted 6 authors, 4 of which I didn't know, and I said, I have all these interviews, hundreds of them. I know there's a book. I'm terrified of the process. Will one of you work with me? And David Ritz, who he's done like 65 books, one-on-one with everyone from Don Rickles to Ray Charles. He would get together with them and write books. Marvin Gaye. So David and I hit it off. I mean, he's, a couple decades older than me. He was so intrigued. He said, Mark, no one's ever contacted me like this. So he really talked me through the process and made it more manageable, because I overwrite, and David was really good with editing me down and just talking me through the process. But it was 4 years basically that I wrote this, and I just didn't. It was, to me personally, it felt like pushing up a boulder every day, and I'm just like, how am I going to get this done? But between David and Christine and praying, and it was I'm really happy with how it turned out. But there were definitely days I did not have faith in myself, and I think if I did this again, I would hope I could give myself a little bit more grace and encouragement and a little bit more credit that something like this is possible.
Well, one of the things that I find inspiring about it, and maybe we can end on this, is that you took a fandom, like an obsession, if you will, and turned it into something that can enrich other people. Because sometimes people are like, "Oh, she's so into Harry Potter. That's ridiculous." Like that being a super fan is frivolous, or you could be doing so many other things, or you know what I mean? Yeah. And so there's something about taking something that just hooked you and creating something out of it.
Yeah, I didn't think there was a book there, but so many people in America for 8 years is like, do a book. You need to do a book. The Carson podcast, the book's maybe 30% my podcast, maybe 40 and 60% new stuff. I wanted to make sure the people that listened to me for 8 years, as much new research and new interviews. Like Jay Leno gave me 50 minutes. I couldn't get him from my podcast. So that was really important to me. But out of the 400 people I talked to, at least 50 people are not with us anymore. And it breaks my heart. And I'm so happy with some of these people that are not public figures that I was able to get their families were like, Mark, thank you so much. My dad passed or whatever here and there. And thank you that we have this. We don't have any other interviews with him talking about his career. Like family members would be like, we learned so much. We had no idea.
Right.
So I'm just glad I got to sit down with so many of these legends. Like I talked to Carl Reiner a month before he passed, and we talked 3 times, and he was singing Irish song to me it was a month before he passed, and he was just such an inspiration. So I feel very fortunate I was able to get a lot of these stories. And, I would talk Johnny Carson, and then I would talk about the other areas of their career if they would give me time. So it was really my privilege and an honor to host that podcast and have people come with me for those 8 years.
And for the people that pass that aren't public figures, for their loved ones just to have their voice, to be able to hear them talking like that alone is something. All right, here's my final question.
Yes.
You probably thought about this when you first became a fan, but you probably thought about it a lot more since then. Why do you love Johnny Carson?
I think that there's maybe on television, at least for a late night or a comedian, nobody more likable. There was just something about him, and I think that's why he sustained for 30 years. It was just the kids with animals, with movie stars, people that weren't famous. There was just a likability, but at the same time, I knew that there had to be more behind the scenes and with him, and I was just intrigued, the curiosity. If there were all these books or it existed, what went on behind the scenes at The Tonight Show, there was just something about him, I don't know, that was special, especially when he went away when he was 66 and we really never got to see him again. There's all this mystery about what was going on, the retirement years, but I was just drawn to him. I mean, there are probably other people like Letterman that, or I would say maybe definitely comedy innovators and maybe you're funnier, but I think Johnny is a host. There was nobody better. But I think Dave and Jay, for the most part, you can kind of tell how their shows are put together and who they are as people. But Carson was this mystery. So that was part of it. And I'm just so glad that his work lives on. Over 3 billion views on YouTube of Carson and his Tonight Show. The official Johnny Carson YouTube channel, over 1 million subscribers, and people just miss him. They miss him. They miss his appearances with having on someone like Rodney Dangerfield. And some of these appearances are just as funny as they were decades period. I have to constantly remind myself that Carson has not been on this planet for 21 years, and he's been off the air now for 32, 33 years. It does not feel like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's something comforting about him. Like
I think comfort, and that's good. That's a good,
yeah. There's something about it that, okay, I know where I am in the world because that. Yeah. This was a delight. Thank you for the interview. I really enjoyed it, and congratulations on the book.
Oh, Dennis, I really appreciate it. You're really good at what you do. It was so much fun talking to you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks again to Mark Malkoff. Pick up his book, Love Johnny Carson. All right, so this happened. As I mentioned in the interview, I saw Charo in concert the other night at Pepperdine University. Charo was like part of my childhood. She was just on TV a lot. She was on variety shows. She was the coochie girl and, musician. And, she was on the Carson show. She was on Sonny and Cher and all that stuff. So I've kind of loved her in a campy way for a long time. She was on 1 million episodes of The Love Boat. So I went to see her in concert with some friends, and Charo's still bringing it. She is a spitfire. Like she kind of has that Dolly Parton thing where they're just like sunshine and good feelings, like good vibes. She comes out, she looks amazing. I think she's got to be mid to late 70s, if not older. And at one point in the show, she does like 3 songs, maybe 4, playing flamenco guitar, and she is so good at that, like a real serious musician. And it's sort of stunning. And then she's silly and fun in other sections and comes out in this little, colorful little dress. And like, it's just the Charo that you want. And I loved it. And it turns out that her band leader, when she introduced him at the end, I was like, oh, I know that guy. His name is Patrick Karst, and we worked on cruise ships together in the late 80s and early 90s. He was a music director of the show band who would play behind our production shows. So next time I'll have to hit him up earlier than the show, and maybe I'll get to meet Charo someday. But here's my favorite bit that she did. It made me laugh out loud so much. Okay, so she's doing patter in between the songs, and she says, I have a special talent. I can read minds. I have a gift. I can read minds. And she goes, I want everyone to help me, though. You have to do a chant to get me in the spirit. Okay, everyone say, Okay, do it again. Say, and the audience is like, So we're all getting into this mind-reading place. She goes, okay, and now I'm going to tell you what all of you are thinking. All of you are thinking, I wonder how old that bitch is. And she was right. We were all thinking the same thing. I don't know if I nailed that with the timing and the flourish. I certainly didn't try the accent, but you get the idea. Like, it was just so funny. I wonder how old that bitch is. That's what we were all thinking. We were all actually all thinking that. She is a mind reader. All right, that's enough for this week. Thanks so much for listening. I want to give a shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for Placement Music. We'll catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.